What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and today we're looking at something that has recently been added to Battlefield 1, and that is of course the brand new grenade crossbow for this support class. Now this is a new gadget which has been added to the game in the most recent patch, and I'm going to discuss today how you can use this thing to its strengths and avoid some of its weaknesses as well. Now I'm also going to discuss a few strategies and ways to fire the crossbow just to get the maximum amount of impact in the minimal amount of time. As you'd expect with a new piece of equipment, there are pros and cons to using it, and we'll discuss some of those in a bit more depth later when looking at strategies and how to use this to its strengths and avoid its weaknesses. But the crossbow itself comes in two different variants. You have the HE version and the FRG, which stands for frag version, and these both have their own instances of use. So, the frag round version is the equivalent of a normal frag grenade in any given loadout. You get two grenades that you can catapult using your crossbow, and these things will basically do any amount of damage depending on the radius of which they land into the enemy you fire it at. Within sort of 0 to 7 meters, you're probably looking at an instant kill, or at least 80 to 90 damage. Within 10 meters, you're looking at maybe 50 or 40 damage. Obviously, the blast radius isn't that big, but get it close enough to an enemy and you're going to do a lot of damage. And in the grand scheme of things, getting it into an area with lots of infantry, such as a trench for example, or an objective, is going to lead to multiple kills if fired correctly and accurately. The other variant is the HE version, which is of course the high explosive version, and this is primarily intended for vehicles. It has a much larger blast radius, meaning that it can be somewhat effective against infantry, but does a very minimal damage to infantry and somewhat more damage to vehicles. Now at the moment you're only looking at roughly 12 damage per vehicle shot, especially on some of the lighter vehicles. You may be lucky to get higher, especially for the likes of planes, but at the moment it's around about 12 damage. Lobbing two of these grenades forwards is going to stop a vehicle from being able to repair itself, and more importantly is going to put some damage in perhaps in critical areas such as tracks or weapon cannons on the side of it, for example on the land ship. So let's talk about using the crossbow and its strengths and weaknesses. So a major weakness at the moment of the crossbow is the amount of rounds you have. You only have two, and they take quite a while to reload. So realistically speaking, you have to use your crossbolts effectively in order to make sure you get the maximum amount of damage, and this means practicing and getting good with accuracy. It's something that can be mastered and perfected over time, but definitely not something that's going to be incredibly rewarding straight away. Those of you guys who use this thing regularly will eventually figure out that this can be an absolute monster on the field, provided it is used in the right situations. The grenade shot, or bolts if you want to use crossbow terminology, is not something you're going to want to use too upfront and personal to the enemy team. Now, it takes quite a while to reload per grenade / bolt, and you really don't want to be stuck within 10 to 20 meters of somebody if that is the situation, because they will gun you down before you get a chance to load that second bolt in. The maximum effective range of this thing, I'd say, is roughly 100 meters, and I'd say the sweet spot for using this thing is 50 meters. That's a good enough amount of range to put some distance between you and the enemy, but allow your grenades to do the work that you need them to do with a decent amount of accuracy and avoiding being shot down before you get a chance to put in both rounds. So definitely something to look out for is distancing when you're attacking enemies, and distancing especially when you're attacking vehicles if you prefer to use the HE rounds. I strongly recommend the frag rounds though, because I believe they are the most effective, especially when you're looking at the overall distribution of players on the field. That's going to be a lot more infantry in comparison to vehicles, and the assault classes can definitely do a good job against the vehicles by themselves. But that's not to say that the HE rounds aren't worth using in some situations. So let's talk about strengths now, and what exactly this crossbow can give to you, the player. Now I do have to stress that this is going to take some learning. It's not the kind of gadget that you can sort of jump in with and be effective straight away, because it does require a certain level of skill in terms of accuracy and getting your shots on target. But once you start doing that, it actually can be a really rewarding gadget in terms of infantry dispersion and getting rid of players in very clustered areas. Now, the good thing about this crossbow is that it can change the dynamic of a situation. So for example, if you find yourself trapped in a trench or in a position where perhaps peeking over and looking out is not an option due to sniper fire, rifles or LMGs, and you're really just sort of penned in, using this crossbow is going to allow you to fire out lobbed shells over the line and potentially kill enemies without putting you in harm's way, which I think is a fantastic piece of equipment to use and works in that sense very similar to the current mortar rounds. But there's also a second use as well. Now, certain grenades perhaps don't travel as fast and as far as you want them to, but the grenade launcher here that we have from the crossbow is pretty damn awesome. I have to say, there are some situations where you need a grenade to sort of bounce at an angle or bounce off a certain wall, or perhaps you have to shoot it really directly and really fast, and it can be quite difficult to do with the overarm throw using a standard grenade. But with the crossbow, it's able to shoot grenades directly through places without a lot of dip or without a lot of just variation in where your grenade is going to land. So for example, if you find yourself on a second story building, for example in Amiens, and you fire across into another building, you really aren't looking at a lot of grenade dip before it hits its target, and as such allowing you to be really accurate and disperse enemies in places where perhaps getting a normal grenade was quite difficult to do beforehand. So definitely useful in that respect. The crossbow really does support a new kind of warfare in Battlefield 1. It allows you to really adapt the gameplay in terms that perhaps you couldn't do before with other pieces of equipment, and it's definitely something I recommend using and getting accustomed to. And if you really want to do very well with the crossbow, I have two main tips. One, stick to within about 50 meters of your target, as we discussed previously. That is the sweet spot for getting the hits in that you need. And two, use them effectively. I found a lot of people are running around at the moment with the crossbow in their hand, waiting for the bolts to reload, and they're just dying in the process of doing so. Start laying down some fire with your LMGs, then switch over to your crossbow once the bullets have recharged or the grenades have recharged. You have an opportunity to use them again, and then jump back into your gun. Transitioning between the two pieces of weaponry is going to be really seamless and really effective. If you pull it off right, you can make this something that is very effective at getting rid of infantry units or perhaps some light vehicles in tricky situations that perhaps beforehand it wasn't as easy to do. So guys, that's about it for me, the Tactical Brit. Remember to check out the Giant Shadow DLC and the Grenade Crossbow if you haven't played Battlefield 1 for a while. It's been me as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in another video.